Our first speaker will be Pam Johnson, who's a Humber professor in theater performance on contract for 18 years. She's a steward, coordinator of the contract faculty Forward, first contract faculty to serve on the CAAT A bargaining team as alternate. Jamie Smith, at the far end, is precariously employed contract professional or professor teaching marginalized students with barriers to academic success at Humber College. And Cory Weir is a UNIFOR activist and member of the UNIFOR Solidarity Network. And last but not least is Bob Lyons, a former Saskatchewan NDP MLA, acted as a consultant for the Teamsters Dairyworkers Bargaining Council and fought and won a union trustee pension plan. He's a business agent for Labor's Local 180, and in 2007 moved to Central America, where he helps organize defense networks for workers and indigenous peoples in struggle. He's also the Central American correspondent for Socialist Action and coordinator for the International Labor Defense. So without further ado, we'll begin with Pam.
Okay. Thank you very much. Spending your lunch hour here, and despite the back to work legislation, we had an awesome strike in the college sector. The clarity of our members about the demands, especially the issue of precarious faculty, the solidarity on the line, the cohesiveness of the strike that involved 24 locals of different sizes, different internal cultures, even languages across the province, was amazing. And just one little detail to show you what happened during the course of the strike, we went from a 68% strike mandate vote with a 60% turnout to an 86% rejection of a shitty employer's offer. 95% turnout. So 10,500 people voted that contract down, and I think about 1,500 said yes. So we feel like that's just a huge victory, and also it really proves that sort of Marxist notion that when people struggle, their ideas change and they see things differently. Many people came up to me on the picket line and said, well, I didn't vote for the strike, but now I see what the issues are. I'm happy to be out walking the line. And really most amazing to us was the fact that our students supported the strike massively and in an organized way. They were on our picket lines on the first day. Within the first hour, my students were on the picket line down at Humber Lakeshore. They were at our rallies. They created petitions. They started student newspapers. They organized themselves. I mean, we certainly encourage them, but they organized themselves because they understand that teachers' working conditions are their learning conditions. And they understand that teachers need decent jobs. And they know where the money goes, and they're trying to get it back right now. There's a huge critique of the colleges keeping their money and telling them, no worries, you'll get your year in. And I want to come back to the strike, but I actually want to talk about what I think is really the main issue for the labor movement. We hear in this age of austerity that people can't win on strike. We hear that people are too comfortable to go on strike, that unions won't take their members out, and not saying that there aren't pieces of truth to this. But this strike, along with Ippolito last week, Mississauga Libraries workers last year, the Quebec General strike in the public sector at the end of 2015, proves that workers in Canada and Quebec are not afraid to strike. And I think that's an important thing that we need to know. And the key, in our case, was a clear rank and file strategy and an understanding of the context that we were bargaining in and then going on strike in. And I want to talk about how we got there. I think this is most useful to people in the labor movement. This work began immediately following the end of the last round of bargaining 3 years ago. Support for our contract at that moment was very low. Only 8 of 24 colleges voted to accept this offer. We had a 61% acceptance rate, which was incredibly low in our sector. And the union immediately began to channel that energy, that discontent, into building momentum for the current round of bargaining. So we really kind of entered that moment of a little bit of beginning of permanent organizing, not permanent mobilization. The faculty union has been working over that time to concretize the message to faculty, to members, students, and the community about the deteriorating situation in Ontario colleges, the issue of the jobs crisis related to precarious work, and also the erosion of control over our classrooms, the ability to make the decisions about whether we give a multiple choice test or an essay exam, whether our grades get changed. All kinds of these things have been happening. But we knew that the key issue was contract faculty. And also we knew that there was a certain kind of wisdom or idea in the labor movement that full-timers will not strike for part-timers. And we had this situation, which I think is mirrored in many unionized workplaces, that a majority of the people who can actively participate in the union are actually full-timers, because part-timers can't take the risk, don't have the time because of their working situation. There was a sense among many full-timers that contract faculty might not be as committed, and there was, not a little bit of notion of entitlement in our particular workplace, the white-collar professionals, very much stoked by our employer. The employer has been building in structural barriers between the full-time and contract faculty, like separate office areas, mail rooms in many departments that have color-coded mailboxes to distinguish between full-time and contract faculty. So the union really embarked on a sort of a multi-pronged campaign to build our capacity to educate and to bring full-time and contract faculty more closely together. And we were very much inspired and learned the lessons from previous struggles, and especially the Chicago teachers' strike of 2012, about how to build that as a rank and file driven campaign. We invited them up to, we studied them very closely. And really it was about the nuts and bolts. It was about the regular discussion and debate that went on with our members in small groups, in large groups, in one-on-one that made the difference. Educational forums, very well-researched information to try to explain how the neoliberal agenda was being imposed upon our colleges. We did workshops on organizing skills, and through this process, and let me tell you, it is old school. It wasn't special, but we began to identify those few active members who hadn't been involved before, and we had the plan was to bring them more into an engagement with the union. And through this, we also were able to build that solidarity between the contract faculty and the full-timers that has really solidified the energy that backed up this strike. And I have to say, this was a feat when you're talking about 24 locals across the province, different cultures, different histories, to be able to bring that energy together. We needed to have all those local leaderships on board to some extent, and that process was really key to actually being able to move the strike forward. We also had an entity called Contract Faculty Forward, which was actually inspired by the CUPE strikes at U of T and York, the contract faculty and teaching assistants in 2015. Because those strikes were successful and got some mainstream attention, people in the college sector said, hey, this is happening as well here. And we started an entity called Contract Faculty Forward, specifically to advocate for the contract faculty part of our faculty. It was initiated and run by contract faculty, supported by our locals, not necessarily by the big union, the big OPSU, but individual locals contributed. We set up a website, mentored contract faculty into leadership roles in their local organized days of action, involving students, faculty, and supporters to raise the profile of our issues. And we feel it had really a huge impact on convincing the mainly full-time stewards bodies that contract faculty issues were critical and that contract faculty would fight in support of it. So that was the setup, very good setup, lots of foundation seeding the ideas and bringing the solidarity together. And we also had a strategy moving into bargaining. There was very much the sense that in the case of bargaining, we wanted to open up the process. We saw what was happening with concessions bargaining. We saw the sense that the bargaining team was isolated from the membership as a whole in the process of negotiations. And we wanted to fight concessions, and we also had the aspiration for real gains. So, call us crazy, but we said, sorry, use that word, but we felt that we could actually put forward aspirational demands instead of trying to think about just what our employer would give us. Again, here we were very much inspired by the Chicago teachers. We restructured our bargaining process to create a more democratic structure. We created something called a bargaining advisory committee with elected members from all the locals and mandated it to include our contract faculty members. And that body was a body that the bargaining team had to continually refer to throughout the whole process to make sure that they were on track and to discuss what their strategy was at the bargaining table. This was a critical means of both communicating out what was happening, but also making sure that some communication came back in. And we also were able to stay focused on some fairly key and small number of demands. The key demands were more full-time faculty, job security for contract faculty, and more control of academic decision-making. And we also had the strategy, I think, because we felt the energy underneath the membership, the bargaining team felt strong, that we started off in a very offensive way. On day 2 of bargaining, when it was clear that the employer had no intention to bargain, we filed for conciliation. We took a strike mandate vote at the earliest possible date, and we pulled the strike trigger at our very first opportunity. So we were very much on the defensive with our employer, pushing on them. And I'd love to talk about more about that, but I don't have much time, and I want to get back to for a moment to the strike. It was clear to us in the first few days that this had become a strike about precarious labor. The employer's initial strike strategy was to paint college faculty as highly paid and greedy in the hopes that public opinion and the students would refuse to support us.
2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. This strategy backfired spectacularly as students and parents and the general public outraged that 70% of college faculty are precarious workers on 4 months contract with minimal to no benefits. And we know that people across North America and around the world were also looking at the strike, taking inspiration from its fight against precarious labor that they could bring back to their area. We received numerous greetings from all over the world that really inspired us. We were also aware that we were entering our bargaining cycle in the context where precarious work was actually was on the agenda, and it has become a defining issue of the austerity era, that everybody's told, no, you only have a part-time job. And we know that we are building on the foundation of amazing movements like the Fight for 15 in the US and the 15 in Fairness here, and that precarious work was already on the agenda. And this is not just an issue as well for low-wage workers. In Ontario, 50% of all workers, regardless of their rate of pay, are precarious workers. And this is also why our students were supporting us. Students who see their parents in precarious work or who have had precarious jobs themselves understand this issue. It's such an irony that students attend college in order to get decent, secure jobs, but that the people teaching them are precarious workers. This is not lost on our students. So that was fantastic. That really bound our students to us. We also had excellent solidarity from the labor movement, fantastic rallies, solidarity on our picket lines, and especially from building trades, postal workers, and other delivery people who refused to cross our picket lines, which was fantastic. Amazing engagement among our members. Running the strike has been a massive undertaking for 12,000 people. We haven't been on strike for 11 years, so it really required that many new people step up to the tasks, the picket captaining and so on and so forth. There was an amazing level of self-organization, picket captain squads that just blossomed in a few days, many including contract faculty. Many people were on their first strike. A group of faculty in media studies and marketing in my area who formed a cyber strike unit. They actually trained people on the picket line in social media, did Twitter storms. There were all kinds of. There was the art squad. There were the flying squads that did amazing actions. And when the employer announced the forced vote. We knew it would be online, which actually we were afraid of because so many members that actually, the members who weren't on the line, we were afraid that they would vote yes to the employer's offer. The Stop the Rat Vote committee sprung up immediately to make sure that faculty who were not picketing would be aware of what the employer's offer contained. I think Jamie's going to talk about that. I'm just about done here. Back to work legislation. So when the vote was so massive on our side, that was last Thursday, we recognized the sheer impact of our strike, and it was an absolutely incredible moment for the members that I was standing beside when we saw that. I mean, we were all a little bit conservative. Nobody said it's going to be 95% turnout. We were like, well, maybe 70. Well, I don't know. So we weren't sure, right? But until that moment, and then we all knew, and we kind of looked around to each other, and we said, wow, we have done this. The ownership on this strike by many people who weren't sure that this was a good idea. And that moment, it was absolutely and completely solidified. And of course, that was also the moment that the Liberals, it was hours after this moment, hours, literally 3 hours, that Liberals brought down back to work legislation after they had said in those, a few hours before, we respect the bargaining process, we're not going to intervene. And of course, when they saw what happened and they thought about what could follow from that kind of a turnout, the hammer came down. And just to finish, of course, the hypocrisy of Bill 148, which is going to pass tomorrow, a fantastic bill built on an amazing struggle, and the claim to not to be interested in the bargaining process, yet how quickly they brought down the back to work legislation, tells us something about who the Liberals really are. And despite that outcome, this strike has changed our workplace. Faculty across the province returned to work together following bagpipers into the colleges yesterday. And we know that their experience on the strike has changed their view of the employers. They said it many times to us for the bad, and changed their view of the union for the good, and they feel some ownership. We feel that the strike has also changed the discussions around precarious work and set the bar a little bit higher and given confidence to workers who will be taking up the struggle next.
Great. Thank you, Pam. Our next speaker will be Jamie Smith.
For some reason, when I'm at the thank you. For some reason, when I'm at the dentist, I'm funny. I think of funny things to say when I'm in that context for some reason. And my dentist the hygienist was saying, there's stuff on your teeth back here. You've got to do this, got to do that. And I said, well, someone should do something about that. To me, that's a joke, right? Because the joke is, well, yeah, I've got to do something about that. And she said, well, you have to. Yeah. So this strike, there was a lot of that kind of lesson where, like, if it isn't done by, it felt to me like a lot of things, if it wasn't going to be done by rank and file people, it wasn't going to happen. So we went into this with a lot going for us. We had the wind at our backs in a lot of ways. We had great demands. We didn't have loser demands. We had exciting, motivating demands, motivating to members. The offer that they had for us was terrible, would have destroyed our union, harmed our sector, harmed our students, obviously bad. We had a great bargaining team, this advisory committee to keep them strong when the opponent's bargaining team has been, staring them down for days and days, but they have an advisory team to look for strength in that time. It's a great idea. Compared to, I was on strike in 2009 with CUPE 3903 from York University, and within days, the local conservative student groups had put up a petition that got tons of signatures. They had their conservative MPP trying to legislate us back to work a week into the strike. And this time, the conservative stuff got no traction. The student petition that got 120,000 signatures, like a week into it, that was critical of the management, not critical of us and our demands. So we had a lot going for us. I guess my experience. So I got active with CUPE 3903, and then I was on the exec for a little while, and then I went to Teachers College. I did a bunch of other things. I haven't been very active with OPSU in my 5 years at Humber, teaching at college. I felt going onto the picket line like, these lines are not very safe. Like, we're not a disciplined force here. There's been decisions made by the exec. It was different in every school, but in our school there's like a long line and people are walking aimlessly, and then there's a bunch of gates with not enough people on them, and cars are driving into you. And we had picket captains are spending half their day pleading with their colleagues, like, will you come and be on a picket line? And no, we would prefer to just walk with signs. Stuff like this, on day one, feeling like this is not the way to win. People didn't feel like we are, charging forward and this is our victory. People felt like, oh, well, a couple days into it, I was shocked to hear an executive said, well, hopefully we get legislated back to work, it's just a couple weeks, and like, that's the best case scenario, is we do this thing, we just kind of tread water, not even treading water is active, we just sit here, and then victory will be dropped on our laps, right? And that, at York, we thought legislation was a loss, right? We wanted to win something, right? We're not going to we had wonderful demands, right? Demands that would be good for us and good for our students and good for the world, right? And we're not going to get that by sitting here. We're not going to get that in arbitration. So that was surprising to me, and I started feeling like, hey, someone should do something about that. And so I started doing things, and I want to know the story, because there's 12,000 of us. You get the feeling when we meet people from other schools that there's like this universe, thousands of people. So probably things like this were happening all over the place. Like this ratification vote, this 95% turnout, 86 or 87%, that doesn't fall out of the sky, right? We had a lot going for us, but also it wasn't just at our local where we called a telemarketing operation out of the ground in 3 days. That was a triumph for us, but every other school had similar triumphs, apparently. If you're going to get an 86% turnout vote, that must have happened in a lot of places. So, there was a lot of people stepping up when the sort of basic structure that we were walking into wasn't one that was empowering, and especially having people who are professors. So we all are all faculty, librarians, counselors, but probably 95% of us are instructors of various sorts, right? We talk for a living, and we do other things for a living also. And we're walking around with sandwich boards. Well, like maybe here's a professor of public relations, and they're walking around with a sandwich board. Right, here's a professor of graphic design, but they're too busy with their sandwich board to do graphic design. Here's, things like that. Or sociology. We had no idea what our vote would be for our ratification vote. Well, we have hundreds of sociologists, and they're walking with signs. Why weren't they reaching out to the membership? Like, why? So, well, why not? Right? Well, because they didn't step up and invent the wheel on their own. Well. Especially in our context, it felt like we have this creative fireworks, but we're pouring water on it and keeping it away from sparks because we need to keep these weak, dangerous lines. Right? So that's not the best. Okay, so I think that's not the best. We're picketing in areas where the public aren't there. This just doesn't seem like we're trying to win when we're acting this way. And so I would talk to people. There's complainers. And it's like, well, what do you think we should do? Well, we should do, the union should do this. Well, let's do that. Let's try that. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we'll try something else. Well, let's actually do it. And so we tried some crazy stuff, and some of it didn't work. But a lot of complainers either figured out that they really didn't want to do anything and they just wanted to complain, or they got actually really active, right? And so people who you might have thought, it's like this is sort of a loser who's not helping us to win on the picket line, but actually, and then they ended up being active people. And that's empowerment, right? Those are people who are going to be calling like crazy during ratification call out, and otherwise pushing, because now they're committed. And just being handed a sign and said, walk in a circle for 20 hours a week. It's ridiculous. So anyway,
2 minutes.
Oh geez. Well, I want to talk about what's good. There's so many things that we could do. 12,000 people. If you had, it's disgusting. We have to look to business for an example. But if you had a business and you're having 12,000 people, they're getting paid $30 an hour, and they're professors of all this stuff, you would not have them walk in line, circles, in the edge of town. That's not what you would do with those 12,000 people. You would think about, okay, we'll deploy these people to do that, and they'll do this and that. You would try to win. You would try to get something done. So anyway, what was good? Members jumping up to do the phone around, incredible. In just days, all of these things, 24-hour turnaround. Everything in our strike is like years late. It was finished, 2 hours before. Our comms could have been better, but our public events, we had a few times harassing MPPs. The event in front of the Labour Board. So these public things, members felt excited and felt like we're not passive losers waiting to be legislated, but we are active. And so I thought those were strong, and people told me good things. I wish we had sociologists, like hundreds of them, members who were finding out, like, what do people actually think about this stuff? That would be helpful for us. I think, and all this stuff, we should just do 100 times more. We should do minimal picketing, and we should be, there's an MPP in the riding next door. He won by 500 votes. Well, if Wynne is going to spend, billions on this gas plant for a couple MPPs, maybe, she would consider, if we have a few of them our foot on their necks, they barely won, well, maybe that would get some mileage, right? I mean, if this is, because this is not about, the fiction is that there's this college employer council and the province says, well, what can we do? They're a separate entity, but they were created by the province. The province controls all the levers with them. They're a fig leaf, so the province can pretend that it's somebody else's problem. It's the province's problem, so we should be fighting the province if we want to win, and we can. So anyway, this is a really empowering thing for me. Seeing getting legislated back to work, really it's like, well, we're not powerful, we're not ETFO, they're not actually scared, but they could be. Why not? So we just have to do things differently, and I think it's the way to win, and I think we can do it. So thanks all for your attention.
Okay, so our next speaker is Cory Weir. Cory's involved with UNIFOR and has been working on, has his own experiences with fighting concessions bargaining, and I think is trying to form a similar thing that we're doing, and I'll give it over to Cory to say a few words.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm kind of, as Julius was saying, I'm kind of the odd duck out here. Had nothing to do with the faculty strike. But there are important lessons in every struggle like this. Certainly these organizational lessons are not unique to OPSU or UNIFOR. Like, it's things that we all have in common as workers that we need to overcome. So I think one of the most impressive things is you speak about democratizing the process, which I think is absolutely essential to building any sort of like real strong local or movement or group of any sort. Unless you have buy-in from folks and have real pressure from below, it's just going to create this hierarchy. It'll be ineffective. You'll have hundreds of sociologists walking around, right, carrying signs when people really could be doing things that they're more effective at. So I'm an auto worker, so I'm pretty well acquainted with concessionary bargaining at this point. I'm a tiered worker, so I understand that dynamic as well with full-time and part-time. We actually have a distinction in General Motors. They're called TBTs. They're temporary part-time workers. And I was a supplemental workforce employee, which is one tier above that. And then above that, we had full seniority employees. So we have 3 different tiers, 4 actually, because there were 2 tiers within where I was. It's ridiculous to try to explain it. I'm sure I'm losing people, as I should probably with that. But yeah, so we have workers in there that are working full-time hours. They're full-time, temporary, part-time workers, which is, it's a bit of an oxymoron. And this is by design, having this divide between full-time workers and part-time workers. It allows us to essentially be whipsawed against each other in a tough round of bargaining. And it doesn't take any more than a short glance at history to see that generally the losing end of that battle are the precarious, low-wage workers, the part-timers without that security and stability, right? So a big part of any struggle is creating that solidarity between these fractured segments within a union or a workplace, and really trying to mobilize everyone together towards a common goal. We've had some successes, obviously some failures as well. Let's see here. Yeah, so a group of us, we got together maybe 6 or 8 months ago and thought, we have to really start trying to organize and mobilize around these issues, bring the part-time workers and all the full seniority workers together for a common fight. And but we didn't feel that we had the freedom to really articulate that within the official channels of our union. A lot of the time, you get a young worker coming out or someone that was part-time that were, it's like, okay, that's a good idea, but like, we're gonna run this, we've been doing this for years, it's all right. So they kind of take the wind out of the sails, which really hampers any sort of real growth or strength. So we created the UNIFOR Solidarity Network, which is a completely grassroots-driven. Right now, it kind of exists as just a forum online, but the idea is for it to actually become a political machine capable of organizing and mobilizing workers in UNIFOR across the country. So we just picked 3 principles, which are rank and file democracy, solidarity bargaining, so no bargaining for concessions, complete opposition to any sort of tiered workforce that fractures that essential union solidarity, and no support for corporate parties. Right, so I guess I'm losing my train of thought here trying to tie this all together with the faculty thing.
Well, don't worry about us. Think about austerity.
Self-organization.
Yeah.
That's what your theme is, self-organization.
Yeah, self-organization, right? So obviously there's going to be a lot of challenges when you undertake something like that, a lot of pressure from above, but it's a slow building thing, right? It doesn't just happen overnight. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it's definitely worth it. It's essential, and it's the only way we can really move forward as workers.
Okay,
I guess that's
great. Okay, thank you. It's good to hear that there's like-minded folks in other unions who are trying these initiatives as well. Okay, and our final speaker will be Bob Lyons. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you for the Workers' Action movement to invite me. I'm not going to speak about the strike. The brothers and sisters who've talked about it obviously have put forward the dynamics which built the strike and which was successful, and which in my mind, as a political observer of what's happens in Canada, this is a strike which does 2 things. One, it indicates that the ability of working people to fight has now reached a level that it's much easier for those who want to fight in the trade union movement are able to mobilize and to unify and to use their creativity to self-organize. This is when you're talking about the sociologists, when you're talking about, right? We want to use people's ability, right? Allow them to flower, to come forward. But I don't want to talk about the strike. I'm going to try to put the strike in the context of the offensive which has been launched against working people over the last 25 years in this country, and that the strike I think, symbolized that there's a turning point that we have reached in Canada where things are turning around. There's been some other strikes in Canada that are symbolizing the same thing, that are giving the same kind of symbol. So I want to talk about the struggle against austerity, which this strike was, and which cut through all the bullshit because of the offensive demands, putting forward demands that take steps forward, cuts through all the bullshit that has been put in working people's heads for the last 25 years. By all political parties, including the NDP, by the way. I fought the notion of austerity in the first NDP neoliberal government in Saskatchewan for 10 years, so I have some experience in doing that. Having said that, however, one of the things that we need to do to increase the number of victories and increase the participation of working people in struggling to build their own society is to take on the notion of austerity itself. There is no austerity. Austerity is an ideological construct put forward by the owners of the media, by governments, by the corporations, to try to deal with their internal crisis, which is the falling rate of profit. Capitalism is in crisis, their system is in crisis, their corporations are in crisis. You see them moving, they're manufacturing offshore. They're not doing it because they like to move offshore, they do it because they can increase their rate of profit and try to stop the structural crisis which is growing and growing and growing on a global basis. So in Canada and other places, they've used the idea that there is no money there. that there's only certain limited resources that working people can have. It's that idea both through the economic struggle, like the strike today, and the political struggle, that I think that there is, at this conjuncture, that there is an opportunity to blow that notion apart. Banks in Canada have record profits. Corporations in Canada have record reserves, stuffing them offshore in the Bahamas. There's a whole series of political events going on which makes it easy to tie the notion that the money is there. It's just that those who are bought by the corporations, the politicians who are bought by the corporations, the justices who are bought by the corporations, those who run the capitalist class who bought lock, stock, and barrel their ideological mouthpieces, both through their ownership of the media, but also through a whole number of ways. One of those ways which includes those who within the trade union would believe that there is no alternative to austerity, that those in the trade union movement who accept that there is no alternative. And one of the things that Sister Pam talked about is really interesting because this is the development of the strike using the Chicago Teachers Union model of involving the communities, having the kind of discussions that we're having here on a mass basis, both at the local union level, but also at the community level, and raising consciousness over the issue. The Chicago Teachers Union said, "There's money here. Look who's got the money. Ram's got the money." The guys, Ram Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago. The money is there. That was one of the issues that they said. The money is going to a certain sector of our society, but not to our kids in the schools. Real, simple, clear message, but underlying that message was there is no austerity. And for the trade union movement, the way it seems to me that you make that real, that not just an abstract kind of discussion, but you make it real, is by going on the offensive, demanding, particularly around issues of precarious work. Mike, I'm quite sure, has that same issue in terms of the temps within the post office.
Oh yeah.
Cory has the same issue in UNIFOR, on the shop floor at GM. It's everywhere. And it's everywhere, and it affects young workers the most. And those who are most likely to act as the activists, to most likely to raise hell, kick out the jams, and want to fight, right? Those who are most affected by precarious labor. Because they are the precarious labor. And if the trade union movement doesn't take that up as a demand, right, as a central demand, a central focus of their strategy, then others will. And you will see the growth of right-wing, anti-union, neo-fascist organizations. And if you look on the media, social media, the age group of lots of those activists on the right, now they're not working people for the most part. For the most part, they come from middle-class families and they've had a lot of experience of basement dwelling. But you know what I'm talking about, okay? But if we don't do it, the trade union movement doesn't do it. And it's an international thing. I'm not talking just about Canadian, because this is a problem which is global in scope. And the response of the trade union movement internationally, and I work in Central America with trade unions, I work in South America with trade unions and left organization. I can think, for example, the structure of WAM, the structure of the Solidarity Network in UNIFOR, and I'm sure there's activist networkers in OPSU and the QP, and right, steelworkers there are, I know, right, Teamsters for Democratic Union. In fact, there are networks in almost every union. Internationally, those networks, maybe in some countries more advanced, they form caucuses within the union, and they fight those who don't want to fight. They put forward candidates like Barry, for example, who wants to fight, right? Very nice, great, I'd vote for you if I was here at the convention, right? Exactly what's needed, right? You want a militant, fighting, democratically run, organized trade union movement in this country, because that is in the vanguard of who will defeat austerity, the neoliberal agenda. And in doing so, as part of that fight, create the political conditions to taking a big step forward for working peoples. Because I tell you right now, the economic system as it's structured, capitalism will not solve the problems. It cannot solve its ecological problems. It cannot solve its economic problems. It is its instability politically. When you think of Angela Merkel in Germany, the most stable country in the world supposedly, right, whose political system is falling apart, you know that under that system, right, there is a major crisis that has happened. And we, the trade union movement, the working people of this country and globally are the only ones who are going to solve it, because they're not going to do it for us. George Carlin used to say, you know, the rich have a club. They have a big club, but you ain't in it. You ain't in it, right? So what we have to do is take their club from them and take the wealth of the world and give it to the working people. The working people themselves will put it in their own pockets and build the kind of work that we want, the world that we kind of want. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. We are running short of time. We've got about 10 minutes. What I think we're going to do is we'll just take a few questions or comments, and people leave as they feel they need to leave until the room's empty. Because I know there's people who want to say a few things. So sister, I see your hand. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. This was really great. So much food for thought. So I'm trying to distill down into maybe one or two questions. So the first thing is the bargaining advisory committee. So if folks could talk a little bit more about that, how it actually operated, how much power it actually had. Were there any, was all the information always flowing from the negotiations team to the bargaining advisory committee? Were there any things that where information was not necessarily flowing? So and then so this would have been it would have been comprised of reps from locals across the province. If you could talk about how they were selected, how those reps were selected, and what their accountability was back to their own locals. I just want to hear a little bit more about that. We're talking about trying to move towards open bargaining in the next round at a local level, following a little bit the McAlevey model, but this might be something that EFO could do more sort of provincially. So actually I'll stop myself there because I'm taking up a lot of time.
Just really quickly, thanks a lot. This was our new experiment. This was the first time we've ever done bargaining like this. We had the members of this committee selected by the locals themselves, and there was a choosing process for the partial load faculty because they weren't necessarily in any way voted into our locals, so we chose to bring them into that process. The flow, I think we could critique the flow, but we were there as the conscience of the bargaining team. So we didn't get to know what every detail of the strategy was. Partly that was because our employer bargained for 4 days only. 4 days only, and then they left the table, and then all hell broke loose. So there wasn't a lot of going back and forth. I think there's a great thing to study here, and I think the possibility is for people to look at this example, to think about where you're going to go for open bargaining. But I'm telling you, the process here made the feeling that we had space and transparency. It was huge. The sense that we've had often, sometimes from our big union, that you got to just get in behind the bargaining team. You can't say anything to them or anything about them, is wrong. It doesn't have to happen that way, right? So this is a step. And I think it's something to look at, and I hope people will build on it. We'll try to write about it so they can use it for an example.
Great. Anyone else, brother?
Just curious, because I know it's now legislative back to work, and my understanding is going to go into arbitration and stuff, so I'm not sure what if the certain things have been agreed upon, that the rest will be arbitrated to. But with the momentum, are you folks planning on having a short contract so that you can build off of this, or like, because I get like there's two spectrums of workers, right? One's that just like I want to get that job security and have a long-term contract, or I'm always in favor of short-term contracts because then you're able to withdraw your labor if possible. Like I'm not. Is there long-term plans on that for like next rounds?
That's in discussion right now. And just to say, we're in arbitration, so in terms of the contract length, we have we don't get to say.
Oh,
The
so that
employer
is
wants
up for the
4,
arbitrator.
we want 3. That's what we're in this bargaining process for. I think we're going to be continuing the attitude of permanent mobilization because we've learned how it works. So regardless of whatever that period is going to be, we're going to stay mobilized. And in terms of what Bob was mentioning about the political and economic, when you're permanently mobilized, you have your members engaged and they're on some message, there is the possibility that you can actually work on actually some political activity outside of the bargaining process.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had that possibility. Only the very few activists that might have been able to do that. So we see some new possibilities that we're just now going back to work yesterday, so we're not sure what we can do with it all, but those are things we're thinking about.
Tracy?
I'll be quick. First of all, congratulations on your incredible vote.
Yes.
Because nobody can take that away from you. What the Liberals do, you win. The second thing is to sort of ask about do you have any concrete plans going forward around how you're going to get the discussion out to the members? Because it's been my experience that once a strike is over, unless we go back and do some real analysis with the people that were involved, not just the executives, but the actual members, that people come to their own conclusions and it kind of goes all over the place, and in their memory it gets worse over time instead of better. So I wondered if you had some plans going forward for that.
Well, that's something so I think there's hunger in the corner of the membership that I was working with a lot. There is a desire to keep rolling, and people are outraged and want to have solidarity with other unions, have it ready. So thinking 4 years in the future, what do we need to be set up so that we're not doing our rat vote 2 days before, but that's like, was set up 2 years before. There's a desire for that, and people are thinking about it. I think we need to have a process of like a number of events, in-person events, online, soliciting opinions. It could be artistic events that people from that part step up, where it's like reflecting on what did we learn, what was good, what was bad, how do we need to change, and what do we want to do. People have talked about having a precarious working group. And what would that look like? What would it do? People have talked about having a flying squad that goes when other people are on strike, and we go and, bang on their managers', doors, but they don't know who we are. We're never going to ask for work from them. And then when we're on strike, they can come and, bang on our managers' doors and, things like this. I think there's a hunger for it. It just needs to be, again, it's like, firewood that's just waiting there. And it needs to be released. It needs to be organized. I think it could happen.
Any other first-time speakers? Brother?
Yeah, my name is Peter Vauch. I'm Vice President of QP 7797 in the social services sector. Again, I want to congratulate Pam and the wonderful strike. I was privileged to go to the picket line a few times, and it was fantastic. And to you, brother, I forgot your name.
James.
Anyway, I just wanted to say that one of the things, there's two ways that we can move forward, and that is around not only rank and file action, but also something that came out of the convention just recently. A forum on the Fight for 15, which was mass bargaining with the employing class. I know it sounds weird because we deal with individual bosses, but the question is, how do we actually win our demands in terms of not only on the local level but on a provincial level? And the Fight for 15 is so important in that the idea was to raise the level, to force up the level of wages and working conditions for people at the bottom, to involve people who are not in unions and in unions together, and to put demands that said we're going to liberate 6 millions of dollars from your pockets, from corporate pockets, and put it in the pockets of working class people. That is, in essence, a class struggle. And what that can do for locals that are facing concessions, I'm on the bargaining team too, and I can be a voice that's fairly alone if there's not much push, is give confidence to our workers. And that's where I want to go to, is those kinds of struggles that come out of the colleges, rank and file led, that involve a lot of people, the fight for 15, it really works for all of us. That's the kind of thing I think we on the left, and as a Marxist myself, would want to push, is the kind that gives confidence to the people that I represent, et cetera, because we don't have, our local people don't have confidence that we can beat back the employer in concessions. How do we do that? We support the picket lines that make aggressive, assertive demands, and that was really important that the brother mentioned that. When we demand better, as QP's slogan now, be boldly brave, demand better. So I think that's the key. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other first-time speakers? Okay. Seeing none. Sister, did you have your hand up? You have a follow-up question?
I did. There was a couple of things. I loved how you talked about putting forward aspirational demands, like not just what you think the employer may give you, which is, I mean, it sounds pretty simple or easy, but it's like it feels like such a big risk, right? Because if you don't get your aspirational demands, like the fear is that your members will be so pissed with the union that, yeah. So, I mean, we've tried to put forward sort of like aspirational demands in the past around like class size, for example, and then when that gets shifted to a committee to do a study between rounds of bargaining, it can be a little bit difficult to then make that into a victory. We have had some successes that way before, but I wanted to congratulate on putting forward the aspirational demands because that's incredible. And I'm wondering if you've talked about, like, in terms of continued member engagement between rounds, like if there are campaigns that could be taken on around issues that maybe are not like narrowly defined collective agreement issues, but which would be issues that like members care pretty deeply about, that could then like keep people together, could be a continued sort of practice between rounds of bargaining to keep pressure on, to try to get victories, to escalate actions on things that that members really care about. Has there been any discussion about doing something like that?
Not yet, but I
Okay.
think we see the possibilities, and that was another feature of the bargaining advisory team. People all want to stay together to keep the conversation going.
Yes.
We have another good example from Chicago, which is that they actually were able to put into their bargaining demands that the city of Chicago fund the education system. So
Right.
a political demand inside of a bargaining situation.
Mhm.
I think these are the things that we can look at. And I agree with Peter that we can think about, I'm almost thinking about what we were seeing is that we can have a precarious labor social movement. So that involves 15 in fairness and people in my sector who make
Yeah.
way more than $15 an hour, but it's the same issue. This can be a wedge against austerity, and it gets the notion that that the system somehow is not going to allow us to have decent jobs and decent lives.
Great. And we got another question in the back, sister.
It was just more of a comment. I agree with you totally. Like, we were inside the college. I'm college support staff, so I work in the learning center where I do tutoring. So we were really busy because a lot of students were coming in, and the number two, like, first of all, I'd never seen the students so on the side of the union before. It was amazing. Like, it didn't matter where they were from or what level of academics they had. I think what do faculty do? Faculty prepare our young people and our older people, for the workforce. And I think that issue of precarious work is a huge connection and with that group of people. The two issues they were most interested in, one was 80% of the jobs here are casual. They want full-time jobs when they graduate. They don't want part-time or casual jobs, and they totally got that. And the other one because our management kept telling us to tell them what questions students were asking, which we didn't, but they said that over my dead body, but especially if I have to tell you what I told them. Anyway, the number 2 question was, what is academic freedom, and which we, liberally explained, to all of them, and they got that too. Especially I work with pharmaceutical students, and I explained to them how pharmaceutical companies shouldn't be telling our teachers how to teach, and the whole thing about the calculus and how you can't mark the whole problem, you can only mark the final answer because that's cheaper for the management. So they really got that, and if you want to continue building with the students, I think those are the issues that really ring bells.
Okay, thank you, sister. Bob's got a question.
I have a question. In your presentation, you talked about we. Who is the we that actually led the strike? I heard about the bargaining advisory committee, but was there a? Can you explain the structure of who made the decisions, right?
Well, it's a very democratic process. We have 24 locals. They elect people to go to district meetings, and the decisions are made there. Every local has its own demand set process, and then everything is taken to another level. And so the we is, it was more than just a very small team. It was more than the divisional leadership in our area.
Mm-hmm.
But it really was. So I'm saying that we forged the solidarity between the 24 locals officers, which meant that they were connected to their members, was a huge piece to being able to make this a successful and strong strike.
Okay, so decision making became more horizontal, more.
Yeah. It wasn't decentralized, so I think that, and this is what we learned
I
from the
don't mean
Quebec
decentralized.
students. Yeah, we learned this from the Quebec students that actually, if you hope for decentralization and that there will be radical pockets developing and it'll all sort of come together, that actually you need a unified strategy, but you have to win everybody to it.
Yeah.
So there have to be enough discussions, and then you have to hone that strategy so that it actually reflects what people are saying. And I think around the precarious labor thing specifically, we were able to build that common sense that was what we could all demand. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Question in the back?
One really simple thing we did is we had Google Groups. We had Google Groups where the presidents communicated from all 24 locals. We had Google Groups where the chief stewards we had Google Groups for the communications people. We had Google Groups for the treasurers who were doing the strike finances. We had people talking on a steady basis and checking with one another to see what was happening at their college, what management was saying, comparing notes. And I think that we've been doing for several years now, but that really blossomed and engaged a lot of people.
Great. Okay, so I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much to all the panelists. And if you haven't had a chance, please sign in the back if you want to learn more about Workers' Action Movement and what we're doing going forward. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hey.
Great. Cory, thanks a lot for
Yeah, Cory.
it's great.